Well, greetings, everyone. Good to be with you again on another episode of the Shakedown. Good to have Miss Barbara Gould back with us again. I enjoyed our last two conversations talking about wellness. I want to move into a more, I don't know if you want to call it a deeper topic, but something that I have seen and we have discussed outside of this context numerous times, talking about leadership in a broad sense, but more specifically, when we talk about leadership, leadership at its base level is basically inspiring others to follow. I can't remember who said it, but that if you want to know if you're a leader, look behind you. If there's nobody following, you're not leading. You're out for a walk.
Right.
So when we talk about inspiring others to follow, if I'm going to inspire you to follow me, I have to have an understanding
Yes.
of who you are, what you find valuable, what
Yes.
you're looking for,
Yes.
so that I know what those inspiration points. I joke about that growing up, that in our household, you ate what was on the table, and I'd come out in the morning before I went to school to kind of see what mom was preparing for supper, so I could look forward to that. And if it was pork chops and sauerkraut, I was not nearly as excited as on other days. That was not a motivating force to me. So if you were trying to motivate me, sauerkraut probably not on your list.
No.
But when we talk about understanding, there's lots of stuff out there about
Yes.
cultural understanding.
Yes.
There's stuff out there about looking at educational level of the people I'm dealing with.
Yes.
There's stuff out there about that. There's personality stuff,
Yes.
looking at their personalities. But it's interesting in preparing for this episode and the next episode as well. I never necessarily thought about understanding someone from a generational perspective, and that's kind of a piece of the puzzle that you don't hear a lot about.
Right.
There's so much focus put on some of the other things, but this is a piece that is ignored to a large extent. So, having said that, what exactly, when you say looking at someone and understanding someone from a generational perspective, where are you coming from with that? Are you talking about specific time frames you're talking about?
Yeah, so there are, and it depends on where you go for your research. It'll break the generations down by, little different dates.
Okay.
But like boomers, those are 58 to 76-year-olds.
Okay.
For a lot of us that are working in corrections, that's our parents or grandparents.
Okay.
And then, there's Generation X, which is my generation.
Right.
More the middle age, 42 to 57. And there's a lot of us in the workforce right now.
Right.
There's a lot of millennials, which is Generation Y, and they're, 26 to 41. And then we have this small subgroup that's starting to filter in, and that's Generation Z. And they're, 10-year-olds to 25-year-olds. So we're seeing the 18 to 25-year-olds, depending upon your agency. I know in Michigan, you can be a CO at 18.
Right. Same in Alabama.
Yeah, you graduate high school, come on down and apply before you get any bad habits.
That's
We'll
right.
take you in. But we don't stop to think about, okay, well, what do they value based on how they might have been raised?
Sure.
And who raised them?
Sure.
It's different. For me, my grandparents raised me. So that's even the generation before the boomers. So
Okay.
a lot of my values come from people that lived through the Depression.
Right.
You don't waste anything.
Absolutely not.
Something can always be used for another purpose. I've got 30,000 empty tin cans in my basement because I might need them one day.
The ball of aluminum foil,
That's-
because you might need to reuse that.
You might reuse that. Absolutely. So that's how I was raised,
Sure.
And in helping raise my children who are, millennials, and I think I have one Generation Z. My youngest is Generation Z. But they saw me and my parenting style as quite hardcore.
Sure. Compared to
their friends.
Sure. Right.
Who, maybe their friends' their parents were around a little more.
Right.
My parents worked a lot. My biological mother was trying to get this career and that career and in school.
Right.
Didn't see her a whole lot. My dad worked second shift. Because that's what he could get for a good job.
Right.
And, so I saw my grandparents.
Sure.
That's who instilled their values in me the most.
Sure.
So, and I think we forget about that. We get into the work scene and we just expect, okay, well, if I tell you to do something, you need to just go do it. But we
Right.
forget that these younger kids, they've always been told why.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, go to your room. Well, why? Okay, because that disrespect you just gave to me is not appropriate. Go to your room. Like, we give them an answer. When I was younger, if my grandparents or even my parents, when they were
Right.
there, said go to your room, you didn't stand there and ask questions unless you wanted to pick yourself up off the floor.
right, yes.
You just went to your room.
Yes.
And we forget about, so we get into the work environment and we forget about this. You know,
Yes.
I tell you, hey, I need you to go to collect those trays, and you're like, why? Okay, well, if you're a little older, you're used to a little,
Yes,
different style.
yes.
I'm looking at you like, I'm not telling you why, and I'm not telling you again. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yes, yes.
But we forget, we've grown our children who are now adults in the workforce
Yeah.
different.
Yes. You know, my family and I, we bought a farm about 5 or 6 years ago. But the folks we bought the farm from, that sounds terrible.
I'm like, I'm not
We
touching that.
purchased a piece of land that is used as a farm. I'm alive. We're good. There's no buying of farms in that. Anyway, moving on. The folks we purchased the property from, you could tell that, and I don't know exactly what their age is, but you could tell at either they lived through or they were raised by people that lived through the Depression.
Yeah.
Because there was stuff everywhere that was stashed away that they saved. In the shop, I found a massive Tupperware container that was full of 6 to 8 inch pieces of wire. That you
never know.
You never know. I mean, and I kind of chuckled as I'm seeing all these little snippets and pieces, as I'm thinking, get rid of this nonsense.
Right.
But in in of itself, in
Yes.
my lifetime, if you needed something, I mean, the hardware store or Lowe's or Home
Yeah.
Depot or what, it's
Yeah.
just right up the road.
Yeah.
I just go get me some. I don't need
Yeah.
to worry about that.
And what does the newest generation do?
Yeah.
They don't even go up the road to the store.
Yes, exactly.
They're online and they're like, I can get this tomorrow. Perfect.
Yes, delivered, done,
Delivered.
handled. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they. And you think about. I think it's funny when that example. That it always drove me nuts. The self checkout at the. And I always make the statement, which my sons think is hilarious. I don't work here.
Right.
I'm not checking me out. That's
Right.
They pay people to do that.
Yes.
I mean, but that's a generational thing.
Yeah.
You see a lot of people would not hesitate for a second. Absolutely, I'll check myself out. I'm out the door, and they're probably out faster than I was, but that's beside the point. But you see that in our hiring.
Yes.
Whereas when I first started in corrections and we'd be interviewing people, the benefits package, your insurance, your retirement was a huge deal. We may not pay as much as the plant down the road.
Right.
But for a lot of folks, they weren't as worried about that as, hey, but look, here's this retirement, here's the health insurance. And, now doing interviews, you throw those benefits out there and they don't even blink.
No.
It's, okay, great, thanks, that's phenomenal. So
Yeah.
how much does it pay an hour?
Right.
And the fact that we've lost officers to other surrounding counties for a minimal
Yeah.
increase in pay, but they just start all over.
Yeah.
And it's not logical to me, because I'm thinking
But
longevity.
they weren't raised to look at the end game.
Right.
Our generation was raised more to look at the end
Yes.
game. And,
Yes.
even though it was a little less money, those benefits, well, it's a pension. The other counties around me, they don't have a pension anymore. They have a hybrid, which isn't going to give me as much when I'm done working. The health benefits, is it more good for a family, or is it just a single? Like, these
Right.
were all the things that we sat down and we're scouring.
Yes.
Yes. And the newer people are like, okay, great, it's got benefits. So does the county next door. So if something changes and their pay bumps up or they have a better opportunity, I'm probably just going to go there.
Right. Right.
Because they don't stick to it. They haven't looked at that end game.
Yes. Yes. And I think another area that I've just me personally noticed with what you're saying as far as different generations valuing things, the expectation that I'm going to be important, as be the way that I'd word it. That may be a terrible wording, but I'm going to be important quick.
Yes.
When I started in corrections, the if you wanted to be a supervisor, I mean a front level, a corporal or a frontline supervisor, you better plan on hanging around for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years.
Yeah.
Maybe have a shot at it. Maybe.
Right.
And now, I mean, we've promoted folks in our facility that they've been there a year, a little bit more. But that's what you had right there. That that was your experience level.
Yeah.
But now the expectation is, well, I've been here 6 months. Why hasn't something happened?
Right.
You're treating me like a normal line officer. Well, that's because you're
You are.
a normal line officer. But anyway, so that another display right there.
Yes.
I don't want to sound like the old guy and do the whole everybody
I
gets
know,
a trophy
I know.
statement there. That's not what I'm trying to accomplish. But there's a different mindset.
There is, and I hate to burst people's bubbles, but those of us that are in Generation X that are complaining about the new generation, we raised them.
It's our fault, y'all.
It kind of is. Like, we raised this generation, but I think a lot of us had the mindset of, I want it to be a little different. Like, my parents weren't there as much because they had career and work. So I wanted to be there as much as I could for my kids.
Right.
Which, even though I was a little more authoritarian, I was also kind of that helicopter parent too. Like, I wanted to go out of the practices and every single game, and I wanted,
Sure.
if you had
Sure.
a school trip to the zoo, like, I was going to rearrange my work schedule and be there because I didn't have that growing up.
Right.
And that also wasn't the norm.
Right.
So us being there all the time kind of became the norm. And now you have the younger kids that, and I see it in a lot of the younger parents, they're letting their kids be raised by electronics. Because TV has become so educational, and I use
Right.
quotation marks with that.
Right.
And, there's different things that they can learn and they can play on a tablet, that's what they do.
Yeah.
They're educating, quotation marks, their kids while keeping them busy. Well, that's good and bad. I mean, it's going to have its consequences as
Sure.
they grow, and we see those consequences in, the younger kids not having patience with promotions
Right.
or not having patience with getting that good spot. Well, I understand Officer Smith has been here 10 years and likes working this coveted spot, but I've been here 6 months. I want to crack at it. Okay, it doesn't work that way,
Right,
But
yes.
we've raised them to think that's okay.
Right. I can push a button and
And it's
there
going
it
to
is.
happen.
It happens.
Yeah,
It happens.
yeah,
That is, and as a person in leadership, you tend to, when I look at my roster, if you will, I'm looking at my staff. Most often, I'm going to look at longevity.
right,
That's going to be my first data point is going to be longevity. These are my senior officers, my most experienced officers.
Right.
I might follow that up with, okay, how much training have they received? Correction specific training.
Right.
Have they been to jail cons? Have they been to an academy? Whatever, fill in the blank, and use that as a dynamic or a data point. But I can honestly say that there has never been a time where I've looked at their birth date to see
right,
and look at that as a dynamic as far as an expectation that I have towards them.
right,
Now, granted, obviously that's not a hard number, but still, how can I expect to interact with this individual
right,
if I tell them, all right, here's the deal, you want to be a supervisor, you may have to wait 2 years.
right,
If we have a meltdown because of said statement,
yeah,
am I prepared for that?
right,
Or am I going to be sitting there staring at them like they're having some psycho situation going on
Right.
here? But that helps me if I think about it that way.
yes,
That helps my expectation,
yeah,
and it tells me this is where I need to try to connect with them at, as opposed to wasting my time with something that
right,
isn't going to make that big of a difference.
right. And looking at, different values in the generations. You look at boomers, they were very self-reliant. There was no one around to help them get what they wanted.
Sure,
Those
sure.
those 800 pieces of 6-inch wire.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
they were going to use those for something,
Right.
you know? And then we get to the youngest generation, Z, and they're used to working in a team setting all the time. Schools are geared more towards team, academia.
Right.
Video games. It's not individual video games anymore, like, us
Right.
kids in the 80s that had Atari.
Yes.
It was a big deal if you had that second controller
right.
and you could go back and forth, like you play, I play, you play, I play. No, now, they're playing like Call of Duty. Like you could have 10 different people that you're on a headset talking to, and there's 10 different characters coming in and out. Like everybody's playing.
Yes.
And that's what they know. That's what they know. So it's a different value for them.
Right.
We're used to being a little more self-reliant. That's what was ingrained in us. But these new kids, we're teaching them you need a team, you need a group, you bounce ideas off of, so we've kind of done it to ourselves.
Sure.
And I also feel like it's up to us, senior leaders, to say, okay, I understand you want working on a pod with 120 people to be a team effort.
Right.
But our staffing says we're going to have 2 of you up there.
Right.
So your team today is going to be you and your partner.
2 people. Right.
Like how can we make this better for you? What can we do? And sometimes it's as simple as maybe they're not comfortable with that partner.
Okay.
And I know this sounds silly and it sounds catering, and there's people out there that are going to be like, hey, that's the schedule. That's who you're assigned with. But I also tell people that do scheduling in jails, why are you going to put people somewhere they absolutely hate or with someone they really dislike or are not comfortable with
Right.
when you could just move a couple people and have bliss on your shift?
Yes.
Like everybody, for the most part, is somewhat happy
Yes.
with where they are, who they're working with. Why wouldn't you do that?
Right.
Because as they get used to the job and as they get used to the people they're working with, they'll work with those people that they don't like so much every now and then. They'll work in that spot that's not the best spot every now and then without a lot of complaint. But like you mentioned, that long game,
Right.
getting them to see that long game. This is not necessarily a stepping stone anymore. Corrections
Right.
is a career. And look, a lot of us, 20, 25 years, and you're done.
Right.
You can't go many places, and that's the case.
Right.
So getting them to really see and value and invest in that, it's almost like, especially Generation Z, they're coming in. We're not just their leaders, we're their mentors, and we're finishing parenting them.
Yes.
We're taking the reins from their actual parents, and we're helping guiding them through life.
Awesome. Well, guys, that's about all the time we got for this episode. We got another one following this next week where we'll continue this conversation. And I'll tell you, regardless of where you are in the leadership structure, if you're a beginning line officer and you're listening to this and you're saying, hey, this doesn't have anything to do with me, yes, it does. If you're a corrections officer, you are responsible for people, which therefore means that you are a leader. Maybe you're somewhere in the chain in between. Something to consider. Whether it's the inmates you deal with or whether it's other staff members that you deal with, whatever the case may be, it's something that we all need to at least take into consideration. So I hope that was some food for thought. And like I said, we'll continue with this next week. As always, guys, stay sharp, stay safe, stay vigilant. Godspeed.